Hi, this is Orange County Executive Steve Neuhaus, and this is our leadership series, and I'm so excited and so proud to be here with one of Orange County's favorites, retired General David Petraeus. It's great to see you, sir.
Great
and
to
such
be
an
with
honor
you,
to be here
Steve.
with you.
The honor is mine. Thanks for all you're doing at the helm of the great Orange County.
Thank you, sir. I was really so impressed to be here with you, and so much to talk about. I wanted to talk about, real quick, to start about Cornwall-on-Hudson. You spent a lot of time growing up there. I've talked to your classmates. Can you share some of your memories of growing up in Orange County?
Yeah, it was a wonderful place. And I spent all my time growing up there. I was born actually in Cornwall Hospital, but the town, but grew up in the village. Wonderful village elementary school, then great high school. That was all of Cornwall. Tremendous community programs, all kinds of athletic activities, wonderful churches and other. The 4th of July parade is, of course, an iconic event every year. So really a special community. One of those, I think, that's a bit Norman Rockwellish in all of it. It's small enough that everyone knows everyone else. And again, the school quality is really quite exceptional. There were 3 of us just from my high school class alone that went to West Point, for example, another that went to Annapolis, another that went to the great Ivy League schools and all the rest of that. So just a wonderful, wonderful community, and as Henry Hudson described as he sailed by on the Hudson River, supposedly a nice place to put a town on.
Wonderful. I hear you were really a rock star in school. Some of your classmates, like Alan Seidman, told me that he'd only be in class with you if it was alphabetical because you were a great student. He also said you were a great soccer player back then.
We won the championship our senior year, which is, this is Bruce Springsteen's glory days. That's was it, that senior year. And I played several sports during my time there, and then went on, of course, I didn't go far from Orange County. I went to West Point for college, 7 miles down the road from our home. I actually ran home one time. It was that close. You go around 218, that wonderful road around Storm King Mountain. And that's really, though, I think where I started to discover that I could really excel. I mean, I did very, very well in high school and all the rest of that, but it was at West Point that I realized that I was really quite good at the 3 different elements that the military, U.S. military academy and so forth, put a premium on, and that is essentially intellectual capacity. And I learned that I could be, I was top star man, it's called, top 5% of the class. Leadership, was a cadet captain on the brigade staff, and then athletics, and I was played varsity soccer and also on the ski team. And the ski team, interestingly, won our division, New York, every year, and we got to go to the Eastern Intercollegiate Championships, which is a huge thrill because the teams of University of Vermont, UNH, and some others, they'd bring their main skiers back for that. They wouldn't ski during the season. They were literally on the World Cup circuit. So all of a sudden you're skiing against
the best.
The best, and it's the whole U.S. ski team. They're not whole, but there were a few from the West in those days. But they would come home because they wanted to qualify to go to the NCAA championships and be an All-American. In those days, that was still something pretty significant. Now, of course, in the day of professional skiing, it's probably a little bit less so.
So one of the things, General, that discipline you had of being a good student and a good athlete, did your parents have a lot to do? Was it the Cornwall School District?
I mean, there's a number of different elements that lead to that, I think. I had pretty focused parents. My dad was a Dutch sea captain who came to the United States when the Nazis overran Holland, and he was at sea with his ship. They had nowhere, they couldn't go back home, they couldn't go to Rotterdam from which they'd launched, so they came up the coast from the Caribbean, which is where they were, and turned left into New York Harbor and then right into Brooklyn Navy Yard and say, hey, are you guys hiring? And of course we were. We couldn't get ships crews fast enough, and captains in particular. He was a master mariner. And because they were sinking the ships so rapidly, we could actually replace the ships. I think we were producing a Liberty ship, which he captained at the age of 29, actually, and did a Murmansk run. Half the ships in the convoy lost and all this. It was pretty dramatic stuff. And after the war, he then went back to being merchant marine, was sailed for a number of years doing that, but then they wanted him to be at sea for 11 months straight, and then home for a month, and that eventually was just not conducive to raising a family. So every ship's captain knows how to generate power, and just north of Newburgh there at Danskammer, I think it's called, great Russian, or great
power plant,
Dutch name.
Yeah.
So there was a power plant, and a number of them actually were there as controlling, supervising engineers, because every ship's captain knows how to generate power.
I didn't know that about you. And it's funny, a lot of Cornwall residents say that in his older years, your father, he would come and he would talk about two things. He would talk about how proud he was of you as being a general, and he'd also talk about how proud he was of his service during World War II.
It was very significant, actually. And he also got a very high medal for bravery one time.
Wow.
A ship caught fire, I think in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, of all things, where they were. And it was an ammunition ship, and everybody was heading for the hills as quickly as they can. And he actually went and helped put out the fire. It was quite significant. The whole harbor could have gone up. So and I asked him later, I said, what a courageous thing. He said, no, I couldn't outrun it. I figured I better. So a typical blunt. But, the Dutch are famously known for their directness, thriftiness, frankly, bluntness. And I remember coming home once or twice saying, well, I didn't quite get the A+ in this one. And he'd just turn to, I'd give some excuse and he'd just turn to me and say, results, boy.
Wow.
And but no, they were my biggest fans, very supportive, very, very big emphasis on reading and intellectual pursuits and this kind of stuff. And they'd drag me around all these sites every summer when I just wanted to hang out at the motel pool. I'd be forced marched around Walden Pond to put another stone on Thoreau's house or something like that.
Wow.
But so I was very fortunate in that regard. And again, they pushed pretty hard, but I think in a good way. They were sort of the American versions of Tiger Moms, or Dutch American versions of Tiger. But we also spent a lot of time sailing on the Hudson River. We were members of the little yacht club down there in Cornwall, which is lovely. And Cornwall has that picturesque river side that they've done a lot to improve over the years. In fact, when my father passed away, that was one of the locations where we put some of his ashes.
Oh, wow.
It was an interesting episode because, it was a pretty solemn moment. I was the commander of U.S. Central Command at the time, just home from the surge in Iraq, and before the surge in Afghanistan, I had a pretty large team of, I had county police, I had Cornwall police, we had my own security, we had the whole entourage that's with me for all the other events that I was doing, which included, by the way, speaking at my 40th high school graduation anniversary, which was great fun. But so I'm down there, putting the ashes out there, and of course up comes somebody in a kayak and say, "Hey, General Petraeus, how are you? Good to see you." So can I get will you sign my whatever?
Oh no.
But no, again, a wonderful community, and but then went on to West Point, and I think a lot with that influence in mind, I had a degree of focus, I guess it is, commitment, determination, healthy ambition and that kind of stuff. Part of it also was if you're playing intercollegiate sports, so I was soccer, skiing, soccer, you're sort of exhausted and you can't go off and do some of the stuff that some of your classmates are doing, which are essentially screwing off. I mean, having fun, but not as focused, because I just couldn't stay up that late. I mean, I had to be in bed by 11 because you're in first formation, I think it was at 6 or 6:15. So, there's a mythology that I was staying up late, had late lights, as it was called, all the time. I could barely make it to taps.
You're physically exhausted.
But you're physically exhausted. You're really, really using yourself up in the playing fields each day, particularly with preseason skiing, which is some of the most rigorous athletic training I've ever done. We'd literally run up the ski slope there at West Point and run endless stairs in the stadium and sprints and all the rest, because you're with the Nordics as well as the downhillers. We're the downhillers, but we also, and the captain of the team my freshman year actually eventually went to 5 Olympics, I think it was.
Wow.
First as a cross-country skier twice, and then 3 times as a biathlete.
Now, you seem like, when we talk about leadership, we always hear people saying, never quit. That whatever you do, never quit. You seem like you don't even have that in your vocabulary.
I don't think you can have that in your vocabulary. No. I mean, I threw up a number of times, but I kept on going. Literally, hill sprints and stairs, I think, can bring you to that point faster than we would. First, you'd go up on one foot, then on the other foot, then on both feet, then carrying somebody, and then just running, period. And there's a point really for just about everybody where that does get to you. So But no, night stalkers don't quit,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
they say in
exactly.
the 160th Aviation, Special Ops Aviation Regiment, and that was not in my vocabulary either.
You never laid up at night at West Point saying, "What the heck did I get into? I should have went to one
Oh,
of these
I
Ivy
think
Leagues."
no. I think you do that
Yeah.
periodically. I'll tell you, I did that in the beginning of the surge in Iraq too. I remember the door closed one night after day 2 in command, where we went downtown Baghdad, and I just couldn't believe how transformed for the worse.
Wow.
The situation. Keep in mind that I was a commander. There was a 2-star, a 3-star, and a 4-star, and I had a 15-month gap between the 3-star command there and the 4-star command with the surge. And it had really gone down very, very alarmingly. And I remember visiting, as the 3-star, we were building police stations and training centers and all the rest of it, lots of infrastructure to support all of the elements of the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Interior. And I remember visiting some of these. They're just flat blown up, just roads all destroyed, bridges blown up, everything else. And I went back that night and, hey, okay, guys, thanks, see you in 11 o'clock or whatever it was. The door closed, and I literally put my head in the desk and said, man, what did I get myself into this time? But obviously, at the end of the day, our men and women in uniform did absolutely magnificently, together with our coalition and Iraqi partners, and transformed a country that was in the throes of an alarmingly escalating civil war, Sunni Shia, and pulled it out of that, and then drove violence down by nearly 90%.
It's amazing. So I've read your book Conflict twice through Audible. So I've gotten both authors reading it, and it's interesting having lived through watching everything happening unfold since September 11th and going through those 2 wars. Your afterthoughts on it, and also your thoughts on Vietnam, interesting too. And it goes back to, your 4 taskers of a good leader and the big idea.
Yeah, probably be a good time to talk about that. And also, by the way, just to thank you for what you've done in uniform, in addition to being, again, at the helm of Orange County as the executive, but your own service in Iraq getting called up also when Russia invaded Ukraine, and now what you're doing is along with everyone else, as you do the rebalance to Asia. So between the 3 and 4-star tours in Iraq, I had this 15-month period where I was in charge of basically, we called it the engine of change for our Army, where you control all the different elements of DOTLM PF, doctrine, organizational architecture, leader development. I oversaw all of the commissioned, non-commissioned warrant officer schools and training. So it was about, I think, 15 or 16 different training centers. I was the 3-star, they were commanded by 2-stars. The scenario at the National Training Center, the Battle Command Training Program, which oversaw the preparation of the 2, 3, and 3-star headquarters going to Iraq and Afghanistan. It just keeps going on and on. And during that period, we not only did the Counterinsurgency Field Manual, the first time a manual has ever been done in less than a year from start to publication, but also I distilled for myself an intellectual construct for the exercise of strategic leadership. Although I should point out to those watching that any leader at any level performs the 4 tasks I'm going to lay out. The difference is the strategic leader is performing task number 1 unconstrained by those above him, largely unconstrained by those above him. By the way, you are a strategic leader as the county executive. Yes, there's some, you work within state and all kinds of this and that, but you have a lot of latitude in determining the big ideas. And that's the first task, is you have to get the big ideas right. You have to craft the right strategy. In conflict, that means understanding the nature of the war in which you're engaged, your forces, the enemy forces, the geographic terrain, the human terrain, the neighborhood, all the elements of society, how the country's supposed to work, how it really works, and again, get that right. And to remember, have in your mind what Clausewitz cautioned, which is the foremost task of a commander is to determine the nature of the war in which he's engaged, and not to try to make it into what he'd like it to be, but to recognize what it actually is. We've had episodes. You read the book, 13 years, we got the big ideas wrong in Vietnam. It took us at least 8 years or so to get the big ideas right in Afghanistan. Iraq, we had brilliant early ideas for the invasion, and 2 terrible big ideas, fire the entire Iraqi military without telling them how we're going to enable them to provide for themselves and their families, and then firing the bureaucrats, essentially. Debathification, when it went down to level 4, it fired tens of thousands of bureaucrats, many Western educated, that we needed to run a country we didn't sufficiently understand without an agreed reconciliation process. So again, there's a lot of history here. of not getting big ideas
Yeah.
right in conflicts, many where we did. Gulf War, Panama, the British in Oman, the British in Falklands, Malaysia, not the French in Indochina or Algeria. So it's very interesting to look at. But this is the most important task, really, of any leader, but it's critically important that the strategic leader gets this right, because, of course, everyone else is operating within the decisions that the strategic leader makes about the overall strategy, the overall big ideas. Then you have to communicate the big ideas effectively through the breadth and depth of the organization and to everyone who has a stake in the outcome. And that's a big universe. That's America's mothers and fathers. It's not just the White House, number 10 Downing Street, and the Iraqi White House. It's the Iraqi people. It's coalition partner countries, all of this. It's a huge, and you have to be accessible to the press, be first with the truth, by the way, and all the rest of that. Then you have to oversee the implementation of the big ideas. That's the third task. This is the energy the leader provides, the inspiration, the example that the leader provides. It is hiring the best and brightest and hanging on to them and incentivizing them. It's allowing those not measuring up to move on to something else. It's the organizational architecture that you design. It's constantly changing. Nobody gives you a template for how you're going to carry this out. It is how you spend your time. Your battle rhythm is crucially important. The frequency of meetings, the substance of them. It's the metrics that you use that tell you whether you're winning or losing. You know, Vietnam, the metric was body count because we're trying to win a war of attrition. Well, that was the wrong big idea and therefore the wrong metric. We should have focused on security of the people. We couldn't win a war of attrition against North Vietnam. They could escalate right along with us. Thrashing around in the jungle, however courageous and full of initiative and determination our men and women were on the ground, it was the wrong strategy. We would take Hamburger Hill and then we'd leave it a few weeks later. So it had ephemeral effects. We thought we could kill so many of them that they couldn't keep coming back. That was a very seriously bad assumption. In the meantime, the insurgents, the Viet Cong, are using the villages and hamlets as sources of recruits, sanctuary, rice, you name it. And that's where we should have been focused from the beginning. We didn't do it until late 1968. So the focus, the metric should have been, look, you keep track of how many bad guys you kill. We did that during Iraq, but that was not the be-all and end-all. Because our biggest of the big ideas was secure and serve the people, which we could only do by living with them, reversing 180 degrees what we've been doing, going back into the neighborhoods, gated communities, biometric ID cards, clearing them of bad guys and keeping them out. Yeah, you need to kill or capture bad guys, especially the irreconcilables. But then we also had promote reconciliation. We can't kill or capture our way out of an industrial strength insurgency. We need to reconcile with as many as we can, bring them over to our side, pursue the irreconcilables even more relentlessly, all of this. And so you have to have metrics that correspond with that. In that case, it was civilian casualties. It was high-profile attacks, suicide bombings. It was our own casualties, obviously. And then it's the spreading of the security. How are we doing with that? And we had killing bad guys in there. But again, that's not the be-all and end-all. The be-all and end-all is, in our case, was securing the people and providing a better life for them so they would be committed to what we were doing and reject what it was that Al-Qaeda or Sunni insurgents or Shia militias supported by Iran were doing, which was generally not bringing great results for their communities. And there's a fourth task, which is enabled by events on the battle rhythm or forced by them in some cases, because you actually need to force yourself to sit down and determine how you need to refine the big ideas to do it again and again and again. So this intellectual construct applies at all levels of leadership. There's a lot more detail to this, by the way. In fact, as you know, there's a website at the Belfer Center at Harvard. Yeah. So if you go to belfercenter.org and search for Petraeus on strategic leadership, it'll pop up. There were a number of graduate students when I was a fellow at Harvard who wanted to help me distill this. They were all in the war zones as commissioned officers, and now we're doing graduate study at Harvard. I think it's very, very helpful as a construct to think it through. Very applicable in business as well. I often offer Netflix as a great example. Reed Hastings, a great strategic leader, right up there with Jack Ma and Jeff Bezos and so forth. But, you know, 4 incarnations, very simplistic here. But first, big idea, we're going to put movies in the hands of customers without brick and mortar. So you put Blockbuster out of business. There's one left in the U.S. at this point. Bend, Oregon refuses to let its Blockbuster die, and that's great because people of my generation can take our kids there and show them what we used to do on a Friday night. Second big idea is he recognizes the context has changed in looking at the fourth task, determining how they need to refine the big ideas, because others are beginning to compete by mailing movies to people. And so now he recognizes broadband speeds have increased to the point where he can have them download movies. So that's great. Third big idea is the breakout moment. This is we're going to make our own content, $100 million on House of Cards, all these other iconic series that we know and binged watched during the early months of the pandemic. And then the fourth big idea is we're going to make major motion pictures. And they go out and buy not one but two major movie studios. And it was a great metric. A few years ago, they got more Academy Award nominations than any other major movie studio. There's one issue there. I did sit down with him one time and talked about my intellectual construct. He said it's very similar to his. And I mentioned, that movie in which Brad Pitt plays Stan McChrystal, General Stan McChrystal, just doesn't work. Brad Pitt has no sense of humor. He marches around like a little wooden soldier. He salutes awkwardly all the time. And it just doesn't get Stan McChrystal, with whom I spent probably 5 years in combat over time in Iraq and Afghanistan. But beyond that, I said I couldn't believe that Brad Pitt didn't hold out to play me.
I know. But didn't Russell Crowe play you?
He did, but I've never been able to stay awake long enough in the movie. I only watch movies on international flights, and I've never been able to stay awake long enough to see my little bit part played by Russell Crowe.
That's amazing.
But yeah, Gladiator.
Yeah, exactly. I think those are pretty comparable as top actors. I mean, it could have been a lot worse.
It could have been a lot worse. Yeah, I'll have to stay awake long enough to see how he actually does.
So you write this incredible book, Conflict, and it comes out. By the way, it's obviously I saw you give it at the Union League Club, give a quick interview on it, and I had actually Alan Simon and a couple other friends with me watching you on the stage. And then right after you launched the book, and Ukraine's still going on today. But then the invasion or the attack in Israel, and now we have that conflict. Is there going to be? Is there a conflict too?
It's already out. You missed it. It came out on the 15th of October.
Wow. So okay, I got to get in.
So it's the paperback version, which typically comes out a year later. But it's edition 2. We added a chapter on Gaza, extended the chapter on Ukraine, augmented the chapter on the future of war, and all the rest of that. So yeah, I could envision doing this every year.
I could see
We'll see whether or not the publisher wants that.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you about is like the current state of affairs in the world. Everything seems to be this unraveling.
It's pretty fraught. Yeah, I think we face more challenges just in sheer number and threats and so forth, and at least one much more complex challenge than we have at any time, at least since the end of the Cold War. So if you think of the United States as the guy in the circus that's keeping a lot of plates spinning together with allies and partners on various of those plates, and these represent the threats and challenges. There's China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, still Islamist extremist groups that have their individual plates, and we have to keep an eye and pressure on them. There's cyber threats. There's threats and challenges associated with climate change. You're experiencing one right now, presumably, this serious fire situation in Orange County of all places. I mean, when was the last time we ever had to fight fires of any magnitude?
It looks like California. We've never seen something like this.
So, and again, the severity of the storms, the frequency of storms, all of this, I think, again, pretty undeniable, frankly. And the question is, how do you react to it? How do you mitigate the risks of all of that? But so, and again, I could go on. There's many others that are there, domestic populism, places around the world, and so on. So there's more of these. And then the one that represents the U.S. and Western relationship with China, that plate's bigger than all the others. And so, again, much, much more challenging landscape as the world has evolved, really during the time that I've been at KKR. I joined KKR over 11 and a half years ago, been a partner, a period of extraordinary growth, 83 billion under management to 624 billion now. It's really quite, and we do the geopolitical risk assessment during the diligence process while we're looking at potential deals and ensure that we can mitigate them sufficiently that they won't prevent a successful outcome, or we veto the deal, which we have done on a number of occasions. And we help companies when they run into problems, and then we do a lot of work with our major investors to examine the world in which we're all trying to invest successfully together. It's very stimulating work, But during that period, the world has undergone seismic change. We were in an era that could be described as benign globalization in 2013. All the barriers to trade, investment, capital, data flows, and so forth were being reduced. Globalization, as measured by global trade, was going up like this. And economics largely drove geopolitics. 11 and a half years later, we're in an era of renewed great power rivalries, mostly associated with the continued rise and more aggressive actions of China on the global stage, but also Russia invading Ukraine, all the turmoil in the Middle East, and so forth. All challenges to the so-called rules-based international order that we helped establish in the wake of World War II, along with our allies and partners, and which has generally served us pretty well. But it requires U.S. leadership around the world. Again, we're the lead element, keeping all these different plates spinning. But again, 11 and a half years later, now geopolitics is back with a vengeance. The so-called holiday from history is over. Geopolitics is driving economics, and all those barriers that were being reduced are now going up very significantly. 100% U.S. and Canadian tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. 40-ish% European tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Tariffs on many, many of the goods from China, initially established by the previous administration, sustained by the current administration, and I'm sure will be probably increased by the incoming administration. Lots of other issues out there. And so it's a much, much more challenging landscape, as you well know.
And you're the guy still, you have your leadership with KKR, your leadership with the military. You're still the go-to guy. Anything blows up in the world, I'm sure you're booked, because I see on TV, you're on BBC, CNN, Fox. They want to get your comments.
I wouldn't overstate that, but it's nice to still be, in a way, sort of relevant. And I'm totally non-political, so I don't get caught up in the domestic political stuff.
Great.
I don't even register to vote, much less vote. I stopped when I was promoted to 2 stars. I felt that senior military in uniform, I actually think in retirement as well, should generally be non-political. Just leave that to other people. And therefore, members of either party will seek my thoughts and advice. I travel very extensively. I just finished my 4th trip to Ukraine in the last 18 months. I was in Israel, knew very, very well the Israeli defense minister until he was fired a couple of weeks. I just got back from Abu Dhabi yesterday, actually, a big annual gathering of current and former foreign ministers in the region and so on. So I visit about 25 different countries a year, actually spend time there, not just transiting, many of them more than one time, almost every major U.S. city, a lot of time in Washington and New York, needless to say. But I'm very, very fortunate, to have this kind of very intellectually stimulating position at KKR, great, incredible team, that are very small, but that I'm privileged to lead. The book, I'm actually the Kissinger Fellow at Yale. I guide a graduate seminar in the spring on great power competition. Various boards, strategic advisors to others, actually invested in over 30 startups and so on. So it's a wonderful, full existence, albeit pretty busy, and not something for everybody, frankly.
Right.
I mean, I respect those classmates from West Point or loving life in a golf community in Florida. It's just what keeps you going, I think, and what gets you up in the morning.
So on top of that, I know you're a proud father and you've got grandkids, and we talk a little bit like personal on the side, everybody's doing well. What is that world outlook for you? Are you more frightened now than ever, saying, my goodness? So we talk about so many things in the air right now. It's kind of a frightening.
I am very concerned.
It's a frightening situation.
Particularly because I believe that U.S. leadership is needed. I believe that if you want to ensure the state of deterrence in the Indo-Pacific is solid, keep in mind that deterrence is a function of a potential adversary's assessment of your capabilities on the one hand and your willingness to employ them on the other. What you do elsewhere in the world matters. And if you don't continue to support Ukraine, I think we should be doing even more. I think the current administration did very well in the early days of the invasion, leading the rest of the world in the response. I think, in fact, Putin was surprised probably by what we did and what the Europeans did and so forth, in part based on our unforced error in Afghanistan. We didn't need to withdraw from Afghanistan. Right. We only had 2,500 troops on the ground. We hadn't lost a soldier in 18 months. The cost was very sustainable, and yet we left, and I think that influenced Russia to think, well, if they can't even keep 2,500 troops on the ground there, knowing that the alternative is going to be pretty dire, which we should have, and I said so on Fox News, feared a psychological collapse of the Afghan security forces, and that's exactly what happened. Again, it was entirely predictable, especially because we withdrew 17,000 Western contractors, not just our troops, and they had to maintain the linchpin of the entire Afghan defense strategy, which is the sophisticated, overly sophisticated U.S. helicopters we insisted on providing, buying American, and then fixed-wing aircraft that were the key to getting the 35,000 well-trained, well-equipped, highly motivated Afghan commandos out to the locations that get hit, which are defended by much less capable soldiers and police. And they know that these are coming to the rescue, and that's why they resist. The minute the readiness of these helicopters declined, which was quite precipitous once we left, and they're trying to do maintenance, and they're getting shot at on a daily basis, of course, because the Taliban are carrying out multiple simultaneous offensives. And here are our maintenance folks in Qatar with translators trying to do FaceTime with the folks, turning wrenches, and it just didn't work. So again, it was entirely predictable. But if you don't continue to support Ukraine, if you allow Russia to continue to gain ground there, why are they going to think that you're going to take an action out in the Indo-Pacific? If you don't help Israel in its hour of need, if you're trying to condition things, and look, I got it. I want to see a vision for the future of Gaza that provides a better future for the Palestinian people there, which is something lacking right now. Frankly, the strategy there, the big ideas, I don't believe are fully correct. If you really want to destroy Hamas, as is the objective laid out by the Prime Minister, prevent them from having influence in government there again and get the hostages back, you have to go in and clear, hold, and build. You can't clear and leave, which we were doing clear and leave in 2006 in Iraq. The results were ephemeral. You drive violence down for a few weeks. The minute you leave, bad guys come back because the Iraqi security forces were combat ineffective at that point. They'd been beaten up so badly. There's nobody to hand off every time Israel leaves a place in Gaza where they've conducted an operation. So they've degraded Hamas very, very considerably. And Hamas is not combat effective. They don't have an effective government. But they're not out of the picture. Who's actually running Gaza right now? It's guys with guns. It's criminal elements. It's remnants of Hamas. And they keep reconstituting in personnel terms, even if they can't reconstitute the weapon systems, because Israel rightly has taken control of the southern border between Gaza and Egypt. And shouldn't give it up, by the way. And we shouldn't be pushing them to give it up for some kind of ceasefire, temporary ceasefire. But unless they clear, hold, and build sequentially all the way from the top, gated communities, biometric ID cards, then you remove the walls as you go down, and then bring in Palestinian security forces. Arabs will come in if you do that. They won't they're not going to fight Hamas on behalf of Israel. Non-government organizations can come in, distribute humanitarian assistance, restore basic services, reconstruction, clear, hold, build. Then you actually have a future for the people that could be much, much better and could offer the prospect, not a guarantee, but at least the possibility of Palestinians in Gaza living peacefully side by side with Jews in Israel. If you don't do that, it just continues to be a humanitarian catastrophe. So that's another example, again, where the big ideas, part of them are there, but not all. And they really need to adopt those, noting the challenges and the trauma that Israel experienced, which was the equivalent of us losing 40,000 compared with the 3,000 in 9/11 and having 7,000 taken hostage. But nonetheless, I think there needs to be a commitment to the Palestinian people there, in addition to really, truly destroy Hamas, which has not yet been achieved. They've been degraded very, very substantially, but not yet destroyed.
Do you think that Israel is capable of doing that rebuild?
Yes.
And not an independent force like a UN or some type of coalition to help?
No one else is going to have the hard edge. You have to fight Hamas. So if you start in the north, let's say, come in a mile, east-west wall, couple north-south walls, that's just to create these gated communities within which you clear painstakingly everything. And then you issue biometric ID cards to those who belong there. Now you bring in temporary shelter, much better than the tents. And as you rebuild their homes, schools, businesses, and everything else, just keep repeating that process. Yes, Gaza City is going to be challenged. You have to slice and dice it. But the further you go, the tougher it's going to get, because you're going to be compressing Hamas all the way down to the Philadelphia corridor, the southern border between Gaza and Egypt. It is doable. It's hard for a force that is small in size would have to call up reserves for this, doesn't have a counterinsurgency field. This is a counterinsurgency.
Right.
Again, and keep in mind what Hamas is now is no longer organized military units the way they were, companies, battalions, brigades, and so on. They're insurgents, they're guerrillas, but they are extremist. They are Islamist extremists, and in my view, therefore, they're the equivalent of the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda, and you can't reconcile with many of them. These literally have to be detained or they have to be killed if they resist detention.
Just shifting to real Taiwan and the South China Sea, with the president of China saying 2027 is his goal, this is the go time.
This is what he said to his military, is to be ready. In 2027.
So you think there's still a door open for some type of compromise that doesn't happen? Because
I think
petrified
the door is open for deterrence.
Okay.
And again, what you need to do is ensure that there is no doubt in the minds of those in Beijing about our capabilities and our willingness to employ them. And this is not to be needlessly provocative. This is not to put a stick in their eye. It's not to have our Taiwanese partners do that. This is to just ensure that every morning when the leaders wake in Beijing, particularly one of them, and look out and say, oh man, I've dealt with Hong Kong, we've sorted out the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, we've got Tibet, all these different issues that were on the plate of President Xi when he took office over 10 years ago. And there's one bucket list item left, but the conclusion is not today. And you just got to keep stringing those days together until possibly there's some kind of alternative option that is available other than forcible reunification.
It's fascinating all these conversations with you, General. One of the things that happens.
This is what I do.
Steve,
I enjoy doing it.
But you have that wealth of knowledge of being in the military your whole career and all those experiences, and now obviously with it. And there's a lot of correlations.
The CIA, where you're looking at the whole. I mean, in a lot of ways, this is not unlike what I did for the National Security Team. Is what we do here for the investment committee, if you will, and for our companies and for our investors.
One of the things my Iraqi, the guys that I serve with in Iraq on a daily basis, especially when we get to the holidays, they start calling and they say, hey, sir, I said, okay, how you doing? They're like, I really wish we were in Iraq. A lot of them have this. I think it's that stability we had.
There's a mission larger than self.
Yeah.
I often will note that, and it affects all of us, including me. When you're in uniform, you have a mission that's larger than self. This is particularly true when you're engaged in actual combat operations, as, again, was the force you were with in Iraq. You're privileged to serve with others who feel the same way, also feel privileged to be doing this. And this is this incredible unifying feature, regardless of wherever you're from and background and ethnic and all the rest of this stuff, you're all engaged in something really important to our country and to the country in which we're deployed. And then generally America's population, even if they don't embrace the policies we're implementing, appreciate the service of those who are downrange and the sacrifices of them, their families, and so on. And so it's very hard to replicate, frankly. I think it is possible to do it. I actually believe in KKR. I mean, I think what we're doing to help pension funds and endowments and investors have a better retirement than they would if they didn't entrust their money to us. I mean, there's a reason why we have grown from 83 billion to 624 billion. We help people build the kind of investments that will serve them really well when they take off the uniform as a first responder, fireman, policeman, teacher, college professor, whatever they are. And this is very important. We take it very, very important. And it's in a great organization. The people are of incredible quality and so forth. But it's not quite the same as wearing the uniform. And the Army uniform in particular, you can read a person's career just when they have the Class A uniform on. The different ribbons show, where you've been, what you've done, how you did, the unit in which you're currently serving, the unit in which you served in combat, the number of 6-month hash marks for combat service. I remember when I did the retirement photo, so there was a retirement parade and all this stuff, and they were going to do a program for that, and they said, do you have a photo for this? And I said, well, I do. And so they said, you know, I had nice head and shoulders. I said, no, in my case, I want to sit on the side of a desk and I want this arm forward because I want them to see the number. I think it was 11 or 12
Wow.
6-month increments. And at that point, I don't think there were too many others, if any, that you know, because I had 5 combat commands as a general officer, obviously. So, and 3 of those were at the 4-star level. In any event, again, you take that uniform off and where's your identity? It's sort of gone. And so there's a great nonprofit, Team Rubicon, which in a way serves veterans by serving others is the mission statement. So because what it does is it provides veterans a mission larger than self, helping communities in the wake of natural disasters and so on. You actually have a uniform, it says Team Rubicon on it, and a hat. And you're working together with others who feel privileged to perform a mission larger than self. But you really have to be conscious of that, I think, when people take off the uniform, because it is very hard to replicate. And there is they're sort of down about this.
Right.
And then you add some developments like seeing all that we worked so hard and sacrificed so much to achieve in Afghanistan evaporate.
Right.
That was a very tough moment for a lot who had served in Afghanistan, and I was among them.
It's funny you mentioned Team Rubicon because last year Highland Falls was wiped out in this crazy storm out of, you had a massive amount of rain, short
Yes.
waves. The two organizations that came on first on the scene that did, I believe, the most work was Team Rubicon and Samaritan's Purse. Just 2 groups of volunteers, house to house, with that mentality.
Yes, yeah, and again, people feel very, very privileged to be part of that. And I'm on the board of advisors of Team Rubicon and a whole host of other nonprofits. Tonight, in fact, is the Institute for the Study of War annual gala dinner. This is the organization that does the best analyses of the war in Ukraine, Middle East, now beginning with China and Taiwan. And they do the maps that you see in virtually every major media outlet.
I don't know if you saw the new uniform for the Army Navy game coming up.
101st Airborne Division, baby.
I was going to mention it.
Which I was, of course, for the audience, I was privileged to be the 40th commander of the great 101st Airborne Division, Screaming Eagles, as they're called, and the 8th to command the division in combat.
So you speak about them a lot on prior, times when I've seen you on TV. You really, is that your baby, the 101st?
Well, to be Eagle 6, which is also even a great call sign. As you will know, for the audience, the 6 is a commander. So the 1 is the personnel, 2 is intelligence, 3 is operations, 4 is logistics, 5 is the deputy usually, the executive officer, 6 is the commander, and it goes on and on. To be Eagle 6 is just, again, something that's really extraordinary. And there's even these great phrases that you can touch. So the very first commander of the division who activated it, and I think it was in 1942 or 41, his general order number 1 stated the 101st Airborne Division has no history, but it has a rendezvous with destiny. So we get that into everything since then. And so I made sure on the eve of the invasion of Iraq in Kuwait, I put out this radio call. And to be candid, I made sure it was recorded.
Oh, that's great.
But it was guidons, which means everybody on the net, listen up. This is Eagle 6. The 101st Airborne Division's next rendezvous with destiny is north to Baghdad. Op-ord Desert Eagle 2 is now in effect. Godspeed, air assault, out.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I made sure it was recorded. It was part of the video that we put out later on.
General, it's wonderful talking to you.
Pleasure.
You're such a tremendous leader, and obviously we talked about a lot of things, but you're not going anywhere. You're still the guy that's going to be called to have influence on how we get through some of these things, and we are really grateful as Orange County's one of our greatest sons. So I really appreciate your time.
Great to be with you, and thanks again for your leadership in the county.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.